So tonight we're going to have a program associated with Old Timers Night. We're going to talk about the types of keys that are out in the world here, some of which we have on display in the front. Keying methods, don't get too scared, we won't go too heavy into that. And then we'll have a little fun with telegraph keys you can't buy in Radio Shack. These are the $2,000 keys up there. And believe it or not, they're out there. You can pay $2,000 for a modern key today if you want to. You can spend $50,000 easily for an old Spark key. But we're going to talk about things you can buy today, but not in Radio Shack. So we're talking about keys and telegraph systems. You have to go back to 1825. This chap by the name of William Sturgeon just kind of invented the whole concept of electromagnetism. He didn't do anything with it, which of course is why we don't remember anybody by the name of William Sturgeon. It took another gentleman, Joseph Henry, who started to take this electromagnetism theory and put it to work. In 1831, he rang a bell 6 miles away. Like so many theorists and what have you, he never put anything to practical use, but he was the guy who kind of said, you know, there's something to this. We can make this work, but it's not going to be me. Quite frankly, I don't care. But we do remember Joseph Henry, actually, because every time you go out and you buy at the radio store for your little project that you're building, and you buy a 2.5 millihenry RF choke, that's Joseph Henry. Samuel Morse was the guy who kind of saw a need and envisioned something called a telegraph. He wasn't an electrical guy, he was a portrait painter. A very good one, by the way. He painted very good portraits. So in order to get this kind of this system working, his envision, he hired some pretty good people. Henry, remember Henry? Okay. And he hired some guy by the name of Alfred Vail, who was a very practical person. He knew how to go in the shop and build things and tinker and make stuff work. So Morris, Henry, and Vail went to work and started to develop the telegraph system. It was actually Vail who came up with the idea, the actual Morse code. When Vail and Morris and the boys started demonstrating telegraph, of course, again, they were starting from nowhere. There wasn't anything. There were no sounders, no keys, no wire, no batteries, so they started everything. And one of the first keys, the key that was used for the 1844 Watt half dog rock, it was a key like this one here. Interesting enough, they didn't even know enough to call it a key. What do you call this thing that turns the electrical current on and off? So it was called the lever correspondence. Original telegraph instruments were called the receivers. So that's a telegraph sound. A real good ear, okay, can copy this at outrageous speeds. They can be going so fast that, I mean, it's just a blur, but the real good operators hear both the click and the clack. The sounder goes down, the spring pulls it back. So the sounders were the first telegraph receivers, and that's where the electromagnetism comes in. So that's the basis for 50, 60 years. Another thing that they had to contend with was the fact that the wires, of course, were miles and miles and miles and miles long. So the current through the wire was very feeble. So in order to receive something miles and miles and miles down the circuit, you had to have very sensitive instruments. So that instrument was a local relay. You had the key, you had the sounder, you had the relay, and of course you had to have the battery. You had to have a local source of current. You didn't plug anything in the wall. There wasn't any hardly wall. let alone any kind of power. I mean, Edison's going to come years later. So you had to have your own local source of power. And well, I'll tell you, these are very clever chemists. They came up with a very simple way to make very reliable power, not much maintenance, and that's this copper sulfate battery using a piece of zinc in the shape of a crow's foot. Hence the name. They're called crowfoot batteries. Down in the bottom of this bluish copper sulfate solution is a copper plate. So you have one wire hooked to the copper plate, one wire hooked to the crow's foot, and voila, magic chemistry, and you just kept on generating voltage as long as the two elements were there. Something that is going to surprise a lot of people here tonight and be a delight to some of you no-code people. And I don't say anything disparaging against no-code people. God bless you, you're all radio amateurs. But the Morse code was not intended to be copied by man, by person, by ear. It was intended to be copied by this thing here, paper tape. There's some coils here, like the relay, local relay. There's an armature that pulls an anchor down on the tape as the clockwork mechanism pulls the paper through the machine. But as the code is coming in, it would print on the paper dashes and dots. And the operator would sit there and say, dot dash, that's an A, dash, dot dot dot, that's a B. Okay? So it really was never intended to be copied by ear. It was always meant to be copied by machine. Later on, in fact in Syracuse, New York, so at a telegraph school, people were sitting outside the class one night, and they were just sitting there talking to themselves, I can copy that. The machines are going on in the background. I can copy that. Because the inking machine made the inking machine made the same sound as the local relay. And they got to where they could understand it. And people got better at copying the code by ear than these old cantankerous machines that never did work very well. So we went from everybody with no code to everybody started copying code by ear. Later on, we started using code at 100 words a minute. So we're done. So they started going back to machines that would print the code again. But originally, boy, the operator said, we're far better at this than these dumb machines are. Another form of automation was something called an ontograph machine. Sometimes there was a need to send a continuous message over and over again, or maybe it was a preamble of some message, or just some alert, who knows, but you had to send it over and over again. This machine would do that, and it did it quite well, by the way. This is aluminum disc, and the code is cut in it. You can actually see dots and dashes and short points and longer points that were read by a little micro switch down here. And it would actually index as it went around once. It would index up and then read this wheel, index up and read the next wheel. So you could send a rather long message automatically using ontograph machines. These things are remarkable. We have half a dozen of them, I guess, at the museum. They all work. They're very reliable. They seem to never wear out. Cutting the wheels, of course, was a real problem. So I'm not sure how much time there was saved by the time you got the machines out to cut the wheel. But anyways, there was an attempt at early automation to automatically send Morse code.